This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Robert, Kathryn, and I are talking about dark endings. All right, so I have a dark ending. I have killed one of my protagonists. How about you two? Have you ever written a dark ending? Or planned a story with that dark ending in mind and done all that crafting to take your reader there?
No, I can't bring myself to do it.
How about you, Kathryn?
I think I would consider what I'm doing dark ending in that, like what my protagonist thinks they're aiming for the whole time ends up dying in the end, but the story itself is not ending on a negative note, if you know what I mean. Like,
Yep.
like they think they're fighting for one thing, but the story wraps up with them achieving their goal. It's just that their goal might be slightly different than what the protagonist originally thought. So I do kill people at the end and kind of expect people to just deal with it.
Okay. Are they the protagonist, or is it?
They're not the protagonist.
Okay.
No, but they're maybe like the thing that the protagonist thinks that they're saving or want to save, and that's like what they think they're aiming for.
And then it's not.
And then it's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So why can you not bring yourself to write a dark ending, Robert? I bet a lot of people can have that same thought running through their head. Sorry, it took a long time to come up with words.
I think in part it's because of what the type of stories I enjoy. I enjoy the stories where, the hero is victorious, and to me, a dark ending feels as if that means the hero wasn't victorious. But it's not as if I haven't enjoyed stories like that, although I can't bring them to mind immediately, so I don't know how much they stick, either. And I was thinking about it when we were talking about it earlier, as to how easy they are to reach a readership, because most readers are probably similar to me in that we're all conditioned with the hero's journey, for the triumphant ending, and some of the major blockbusters out there have been like that. Maybe we see a bit more tragedy with some of the classics, and also some romance, where it didn't work. But I don't know. I think I'm worried that I set up expectations at the start of a story that don't pay off properly, I think is probably what it is. So maybe I just don't believe I'm a skilled enough writer to be able to deal with the dark or negative ending being an acceptable ending that leaves the reader satisfied, because you're playing two things there. You're playing I'm really happy that I finished this book and I really love this story, but I just hated how it made me feel. So there's it's a contradiction. Whereas a hero's journey, I read the book, it made me feel great, loved it, can't wait for the sequel, because it leaves people on a high. So, and I suppose having spent 20 years running corporate training programs, the last thing you want to do is have your attendees leaving and, about to thinking grim thoughts, so I'm used to trying to leave people on an upbeat. So that's probably a part of my own belief system and values and personality. But I love stories like that. I mean, it's really curious how that can happen.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times for me, I've experienced this as part of a series, right? Like, so you'll have one book that has a negative ending, but it's almost like the hook into the next book, right? So like the author is using that negative ending to drive the energy into, this can't be how it ends, right? And then it kind of hooks into the next book, rather than like a standalone book or like the end of a series being that tragedy at the end.
Yeah, I've certainly read many trilogies, and it's common, I think, in epic fantasy series, long epic fantasy series, where you might find a not the main character, but a very central character is just going to be killed, and you can't believe it because it's
right.
It shouldn't happen. I suppose in a way you could, maybe Gandalf. If it was your first read through, you'd be thinking, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe that's happened." So I've certainly had the ups and downs, but that's different to me. That's
different.
That is the arc of the emotional journey. That's not concluding a story on a negative.
Right. So I do have a list of some examples I came up with while we were talking before the call, and one of them is Sanditon, and it raises the question of a negative ending versus a dark ending, and is that the same thing? And so I've not read Jane Austen's novel, but I just finished the series on PBS, The Masterpiece adaptation of Sanditon. So not having read it and not being familiar with that particular Jane Austen book, I thought, this is Jane Austen, it's a romance. Spoiler alert, they're going to get hitched at the end, right? Girl gets boy. Not so much. And when it ended, I was upset with them for not giving me that payoff. So in terms of reader satisfaction, I was kind of angry at them. But as an author, I am all for doing what is best for the story and those characters. And, if my expectation had not been, this is Austen, therefore it's a happy, couple gets married story, I might have followed the story differently without that preconceived conclusion. And I might not have been upset by the end. The ending was much more realistic than Girl Gets Boy. So it was negative, but not necessarily dark. And then the reader's satisfaction piece, initially upset, but then on reflection, satisfied, because I think it's an appropriate ending to the story. And I'm kind of talking like everybody knows the ending. Maybe that's not a fair assumption, but obviously Jane Austen, girl did not get boy at the end of this one. That might say enough.
That's an interesting one as well, isn't it? Because if you pick up a book and it's a genre where you do have a certain expectation of conventions and it doesn't follow those conventions, then the onus is on the author then to be extraordinary, outstanding in their narrative voice to make it a compelling ride through, so that you accept that, well, that wasn't what I expected, but it totally makes sense given the story, the way it led up. But whoa, did that leave me cold? So I think those sort of things are amazing. And as we were talking about, I think, well, actually, there's a whole genre like horror, for example, where I've read a whole load of horror short stories where the endings are almost inevitably dark.
Yes.
Inevitably, the monster approaches, and all I see is the big jaws coming for me. And
Right. And that is the payoff.
We read for that. That is the payoff.
Right. In that genre, that is the payoff, the dark ending. Yeah. So it's really genres where that isn't your expectation, where the ending is dark in a negative way, in an unexpected way, or in a disturbing way. And Sanditon, while it was a satisfying ending for the girl because she's very young and has a lot of life ahead of her, her romantic interest was enough older, and then his arc ended with him marrying a woman he didn't love instead of our heroine. So in that sense, that remained unsatisfying because I had begun to root for them to get together. And while she can go off and find a different love, he's stuck with this woman who's all wrong. And then you have to ask, okay, why did Austen do this? Was she just tired of writing happy endings? Was she like, enough Disney? No more Disney princesses?
Yeah, or maybe, personal life comes into that as well. You experience a heartbreak yourself. It drives you to write a story that's, about heartbreak. So, I suppose if I think about it, they're not so uncommon, these types of things.
Right.
I think there's been a degree of conditioning with the blockbuster movies, certainly, where you expect, because they know they can't let the audience leave that cinema, in floods of tears unless that's what they expected to go in for.
Yes.
So, these big action movies are inevitably going to end up with we hope anyway, with the enemy being vanquished. And I guess that's why the end of the Infinity War, the Avengers was a little bit gobsmacking, because people didn't expect that. At least if you hadn't been on the internet anyway, you wouldn't have expected it. But it's only it's a midpoint in an arc, so you know that's going to recover, because it is a classic hero's journey type of tale.
Right. And when the dark twist comes in the middle of a book or at the end of a book, but in a series, then we can expect the hero to rise again. So, the true dark or negative ending, I think, comes at the end of a standalone or the end of a series, when you walk away from the reader like, okay, there you go. That's it. That's your story. Deal with it. Right.
There is no hope.
Yeah.
Life is crap.
Yes. Right. Sorry.
It's not an all is lost moment. It's just an all is lost.
Yes. And now you have to go pick yourself up, because the story is not going to do that for you. The story is not going to carry you on to a new height, So
I think there's a real skill to writing something like that doesn't, make the reader annoyed by the author. Or annoyed by the story. You can be perturbed by something, and it lead to deep thoughts, and I think that can definitely come from an anti-hero story, or a punitive plot, or a dark ending, or an everything is lost and there's no hope. But I do think it takes a deft hand to write something as psychologically intense as that. Whereas writing a classic adventure story with a happy ending, I think, is much easier.
Yeah, I would agree, actually. Ethan Frome came to mind as you were talking. Edith Wharton's Ethan Frome. There's an ending that left me just sad for these people. The lovers will never be together, and then the wife, who is, has been so needy and kind of depressed throughout the story, she suddenly rises at the end, because now she's needed and has a purpose in life, but it's only due to the tragedy that befell these ill-fated lovers, and that is so psychological. I think that's what made me think of it, Robert, is when you were talking about the dark psychology of some of these stories.
Would you say that a dark ending or a negative ending would rely a little more heavily on theme and thematic content, like making people think and leaving them with something to mull over, more than like a hero's journey would?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I think it has to, in order to be satisfying, because if you're ending with an explosion, an explosive type of ending, whether that's, the war is won, or the wedding bells are ringing, or whatever, readers have that high. And that's a happy place to close a book and walk away and go, oh, good, I feel uplifted, which is a great thing, right? But if you're going to leave a reader with something dark, you don't want to just leave them depressed. So what is the payoff that they receive as a result of going to that dark place with your story? It's got to be the contemplation, the understanding, the, greater engagement with the human experience that we gain from going to that dark place. So if you aren't going to uplift your reader, give them a reason to benefit from that darkness.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Shutter Island is another very dark ending, and that one has a lot of thriller aspects to it. You know, you've got cops and you've got intrigue and you've got this mysterious woman and this disappearance and the storm coming to the island. There are all of these big elements, but at the end of the book, it is psychological. It is all driven by this dark psychological, everything happening comes down to the psychological is what I'm trying to say. So all of these big external elements that lead us to believe we're in a detective thriller story gets turned on its head. And our hero isn't who we thought he was. You know, he's not a cop, he's an inmate. All of the detective work and the missing woman, that was all a farce to try to help him. But in the end, he chooses to stay sick. Our hero doesn't want to heal because to heal, he would have to face the tragedy of his own past. So he chooses to stay in a delusion. That is very dark. And it was a great twist, right? So excellent execution of a twist in a story. And so why do we go through all of that detective thriller stuff and not just get angry? Because we've gone through this process of examination of the human psyche, the human experience, what tragedy and loss mean, and how they can shatter an individual, right? So that's the payoff, and it is dark. But
yeah, and also you in a story like that, you backtrack whether consciously or unconsciously and piece together why that unexpected twist makes sense.
Right.
So it is that classic, David Mamet, inevitable but surprising. It was inevitable that something was going to come out the blue with this because as you're reading, you think, what is this?
Yeah.
What is,
Yes.
And so it has to be something surprising. But
right. Yeah.
when you make that payoff stupid as opposed to surprising, and I'm going to pile a whole load of dirt on Divergent now at the end of the last book in the series. I mentioned it before, and a lot of readers were not happy with it, where the main character just simply dies at the end, and it's all first person, so it doesn't make a lot of sense, and it doesn't seem to happen for a reason. It's just as if the author wanted to shock, as opposed to deftly weave in a inevitable but surprising twist. So I think that's why I believe it takes a fair understanding of the craft to do this well, because you are weaving in something that is going to maybe let readers down, but when they do so, they go, oh, it's a gut punch, but oh my God, yes.
Right.
Yes, So
next week, we will pick up this conversation where we left off, talking about dark endings.
Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.